Good morning, everybody. I see we've already got a couple of people in the room. Welcome, welcome. You're going to give in another 2 minutes for the rest of the people to join. So if you need to take a quick bathroom run, get some coffee for the cold weather, if you're in Cape Town, do so now, and we'll get going in about 2 minutes' time. I see our numbers are still slowly creeping up. We don't want to wait around for too long today. We've got quite a bit to get through and to share information to share with everybody today. So I don't want to delay this by too much, but I'm sure the people will still join as we go through the session. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our June edition of our Lunch and Learn, we call it, where we introduce our customers to guest speakers of various solutions and things that we come across in the IT space. Today's topic is SharePoint and more specifically SharePoint beyond what we normally think about SharePoint. So we've got Gary here, who's the founder and the director of Argantic. They are our partners for everything SharePoint, very knowledgeable in the product, and we've got a fantastic working relationship. So I'm going to hand over to Gary soon. Just a little bit of housekeeping quickly. If there are any questions throughout the session, guys, please use the chat in the chat box. We'll definitely go through those comments and questions and try and answer them as best possible. We also have the Uber Eats vouchers that will be in your inbox within about an hour from the event, the finished event. So you guys can please just keep an eye on your inbox after the event. I'm not going to waste too much further time. I'm going to introduce you guys to Gary to talk about SharePoint. And SharePoint is definitely, from my perspective, I think one of the most underutilized platform that many people already have access to within their Microsoft 365 kind of tenant. But we're only really scratching the surface of the functionality and what can actually be done with SharePoint. It is really a mind-boggling kind of platform. There's plenty of insane things that we can do with SharePoint. It's definitely changed our business completely in how we work and what we can do, and just making us more efficient and productive as well. So we would like to share this with all of you guys, and hopefully you guys find this very informative, and hopefully we can assist you guys as well. With that, I want to introduce you guys to Gary. Gary, welcome. I'm going to hand over to you, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Pietri. Did you mention questions in the chat?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you guys do have questions, just post them in the chat box.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks, Pietri and team. Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present to you today. I'm going to be sharing my screen rather than the PowerPoint itself, because I'm going to be switching into demos quite often throughout this presentation. So so it's a little different to when Teams is normally presenting PowerPoint live. Can you guys all see the presentation? You're all good? Thank you very much. As Pietri said, we're finding this conversation around SharePoint very topical at the moment, and we've got a lot of interest from customers. In fact, probably over the last 4 or 5 months, it's the most interest in SharePoint that we've seen from a customer base than we have sort of the last 2 or 3 years before that. So it was a very good idea, and I think something that drove us to go ahead with this demo presentation session, to update people on where SharePoint actually is and how you can use it beyond its very simple, as Petri said, scratch the surface mode that lots of customers are using it for. So once again, thank you for the opportunity. I was casually yesterday just going over this slide when I try to work out exactly how long I've been involved with SharePoint, and I go right back to the beginning, 1998. So that puts it at what, 27 years that I've been working with SharePoint in one shape or another. So every version of the product that you see on the timeline here, and I see it ends at 2023, but that's, you know, basically we're dealing with SharePoint Online at this point, so it's the same version, just in evolved form. But if you look at this evolution of SharePoint and where it's come from and where it's gone to, I can tell you over the 27 years that I've been dealing with SharePoint, as far as I'm concerned, 2010 was the time frame, or 2010 was the version where Microsoft probably got the closest for SharePoint to be the solution for everything. There was only one fundamental problem, though, this was a time where Microsoft was trying to use its own proprietary standards on top of the products that it was designing. And this is something that was happening common with a lot of software vendors. But it became patently obvious at that time that that was not a sustainable position. I mean, you're talking about things like Silverlight and their own proprietary workflow engine that was embodied in the product or embedded in the product. And you were already starting to see an emergence from the commercial world where everybody was looking to sort of standardize platforms, that standardize web protocols. So SharePoint had to evolve. And as a result of that, you'll see SharePoint 2013 came out 3 years later. But as far as I'm concerned, in order to, well, that version was a gigantic step backwards in how SharePoint was used prior to that. And it created a bit of a problem amongst customers and partners alike. And most of us around about that time frame will share with you stories of discontent with the way Microsoft was evolving this product, because, you know, naturally beyond a bunch of us, especially with our customers, we'd made big investments in learning how to use SharePoint 2010, only for the whole lot to be turned on its head in 2013. However, wisdom with time is we now know that we would not possibly have had the version of SharePoint we have today without that vital step in 2013. So even though we've had a bit of a rocky road in the early years, SharePoint has truly evolved to be a rock star in its current form. But what we're finding with a lot of customers is that many of them are still coming to the engagements with us bearing the baggage of poor experiences in the past. And I'm here today to tell you that the SharePoint that we're dealing with, SharePoint Online, is a shadow of its former self. And I hope to show you through some of the demos of how this has evolved. One of the most common scenarios we're encountering, by the way, at the moment, when we're engaging with customers, is that we are being called to talk to customers about SharePoint because of either compliance, or there is a real desire to complete the modernization journey that was very often started many years ago with email and identity, so that you can better benefit from compliance and AI mechanisms that are needing to be implemented. But what we are finding is that in most companies that we're talking to about this journey, is that while there was always the intention of moving data that sits on the old file server into SharePoint or Teams or OneDrive, because of the fact that the file server kind of just worked and all the users kind of know how to access it, it was the one thing that was just never completed. And we're finding that our engagements with many customers is around how to uplift your file server into the cloud and what is the appropriate way to do this. I can tell you right now, we're working on 5 opportunities actively at this point in time that will result in the decommissioning of file servers that the customers are using. And very often they're either on-prem file servers or they're in data centers somewhere, but it's still physical tin. One thing that's very important though, and what we've all come to realize, is that in order for you to be able to use any component of your business or benefit from compliance and AI, it is an absolute requirement that your data, 95% from a functionality perspective, needs to be in the cloud. Yes, there are some on-prem AI type tools and compliance tools that are available, but they are very, very limited in the usability if your data is not sitting in the cloud. So I would implore anybody who's sitting with a situation where you're still using an old school file server type mechanism to give the migration to Team, SharePoint, and OneDrive a lot of consideration. Now, when it comes to the question of, well, exactly, you've got Team, SharePoint, and you've got OneDrive, what is this all about, and what do I use for what? I found this very nice slide, which is probably one of the most accurate slides when trying to answer that question. When dealing with OneDrive for business, it's my stuff. Obviously, all of this is in a business context. I mean, I'm not talking about photographs of my kid, even though you could store that there, but we're talking about work product that I'm using for my tasks. Now, many customers have also taken the first step to use OneDrive and realized you can share from OneDrive, and you start to get to a point where you create a little collaboration space using your OneDrive. But you're limited in how that can work. And if the person who created it eventually leaves the organization, you end up with real problems. So we recommend that if you're going to do that type of thing, have a look at SharePoint as a publishing space for that type of activity. So you use OneDrive for your own work product and anything that belongs to you, but you use SharePoint for things that belong to everyone. And it needs its life cycle exists way beyond your employment life cycle, if I can put it that way. It needs to sit there, and it needs to be a product that everybody can actually access or take ownership of. And then when it comes to Teams, the Teams environment is specific to the function of the team. So the content will attach itself to the life cycle of the team and or its purpose. So if you start up a team, for instance, for a specific project, the underlying SharePoint, which gives you your sort of collaboration platform, will be specific to the length of time that project exists, and then it'll be archived for whatever time frame or whatever retention policies you want to implement. So this is a very nice slide to indicate what applies where. But just to let you know, in all 3 of these scenarios, the mechanism that's driving it is SharePoint itself. So the files in Teams are SharePoint libraries, and OneDrive is just sort of SharePoint sites dedicated to individual users. So SharePoint is driving this entire platform. Now we go beyond, and as Pietri quite rightfully said, one of the things that always amazes me is that many companies will kind of implement document management on SharePoint and kind of stop there. Sometimes it's because of that scenario that I mentioned in 2010, where you made all the investments at that stage and then kind of had to unwind them in order to fit into the 2013 platform. But a lot of it is just that people are not aware of what SharePoint can be used for. So I put together, a bit of a slide here to indicate some of the most common uses. And believe you me, it's not limited to just these. These are just the ones that we kind of work on a regular basis. So you're talking internet and internal communications, collaboration, workflow, data management, and I'm going to show you some nice demos around that. External collaboration, that's something that's quite cool. Business process automation, I'm going to run you through some very simple demos around that as well. One of the most common functions is HR, human resources, because of the compliance-heavy capabilities of the document management that are in SharePoint. You can restrict access, you can apply retention policies. That's very important when it comes to compliance. Sales and marketing, it's a natural fit on SharePoint. Compliance and governance. There are many compliance and governance tools that are available, and even a series of third-party tools, but almost all of them really succeed in their mission if your data is stored in SharePoint, because SharePoint has all the governance and compliance hooks in it to enable these tools. And I'll give you, there's not much of a demo on that later on, but I'll give you a little bit of insight in how you complete or underpin your compliance journey using SharePoint and the other tools that Microsoft has made available. So I know many of you, and I've said that most of the companies that we encounter will start to use SharePoint from a document management perspective. But I want to take a little bit of time to show those of you who have not used the document management capability in SharePoint or are interested in starting to use it. I want to show you a little bit of a brief on some of the features that are available so that you can understand why document management is probably the strongest feature within SharePoint. So let me get started. So when it comes to building a document library, some of the things that we encounter quite often, and let me just see which of these I'm going to look at first. When it comes to getting started, one of the things that we recommend, and you can do nothing in SharePoint until you create a base site. And I'm going to be using this Argantic Couriers as a fictitious company, and I'm going to give you this as a quick view of what's possible from a SharePoint perspective and where a lot of our customers are getting started. So the first thing I recommend is you get a number of different site types in SharePoint. And if you don't know which one to start with a communication site. And the reason why is quite simply, it is the prettiest of the lot. Now, one of the fundamental complaints that many users 10 years ago had of SharePoint was that it was ugly. One of the things that I really, really like is that the communication site is actually really cool from it gives you the ability to really pretty it up and make it sort of attached to your brand really nicely as well. We haven't done a hell of a lot here other than putting some pictures in, but as you can see, it gives you a very nice template to start with. And the easiest thing to do when you get started is you will have a document library that's there by default, but this is used as part of the other demo. But if it isn't, and you want to get to a point of creating your document libraries for specific purposes, or as we recommend, you either create sites per department or you create document libraries for specific departments. It's simply just a matter of going new document library. And it will create a space very similar to this, where you can now go and store documents, you can create folders, it gives you the whole capability around storing your data in a document library. One of the things I would recommend, and something that we've encountered quite a lot, is that many customers, without knowing, and they get quite enthusiastic when they see how easy some of the features are, they'll go to their file server and do a drag and drop and just drop it in a file server, in a document library on the SharePoint environment. That is an absolute mistake. Don't do that. Take the opportunity to curate your data and move what belongs to certain departments, whatever's relevant to them. If you don't really need the information in SharePoint, you've got like 10, 15-year-old information that you need to store for regulatory reasons. If you've got the space on SharePoint, but absolutely create an archive space there and upload your data into that. But if you've got a large amount of data that's going to consume your SharePoint allocation, rather talk to us about an archive store in Azure. It's a much better way of doing it and far, far cheaper. So what you would typically do when you're migrating a file server into the SharePoint environment is to make sure that you've created sites for departments, create document libraries with specific roles and responsibilities. And one of the things that we really, really like about SharePoint and document libraries is you have things like version control that are available to you, which is a mini audit trail. So you'll see here, we've got copies of the document, each one of these versions, and you can restore any one of them to become the most current version of the document. That's very, very important from a collaboration, from a compliance perspective. It's one of the cornerstones. And the other element that's very important is access management. So you can manage the access to individual documents, who has rights to edit, who has rights to publish, who has rights to read the documents when they're in the state of being constructed. So very important from a document management perspective that these are implemented here. The other thing that you can implement on a SharePoint document library is retention policies as well. So you can decide what happens to these documents when their retention time frame is up. You can put disposition workflows in place. You can put annual reviews in place. You can attach all of that type of thing, and I'll get into that when it comes to approvals and the different types of approvals that are available. You can also go back to the traditional folder. You can still use folders, and there's no reason why you shouldn't use these. You can also apply permissions on folders, very much the same as a file server. You can also synchronize this data down to your OneDrive on your local machine. So if you need to have offline access to a synced version of the document library, you can absolutely do that. There's no problem with that at all. To use the sync function, and it will create a copy of it in your own OneDrive environment. Okay, so that's very briefly on the benefits of using the document libraries that come with SharePoint. And if that's going to be your logical starting point, absolutely give it a go. Just remember the tips that I gave you earlier in terms of don't just drag your file server in there, and please make sure that you take the opportunity to curate your data. Right. The next thing that I want to deal with, and this is something that's quite important, is we're talking about combining different products to give you different types of solutions. So in this case, we're talking about Power Apps, Power Automate, and SharePoint. And this is very often used as the cornerstone for approvals. Well, you'd use all three of those tools generally when it comes to approval types. Now, when I talk to customers about approvals in SharePoint, there's three different types that I generally refer to. The first one is document approvals, which I just mentioned to you in a second ago, but I'll show you how it actually works now. The other one is actual process approvals. A typical example would be something like a purchase order. I'm going to show you one that we use ourselves at Argantic for expense claims. And then the third one, which we're getting quite a lot of traction with right now, is customers are asking us how they can extend contract approvals or signature type infrastructure to leverage the documentation they have on SharePoint, but make use of external, legally acceptable signature type platforms. And the one that I'm not going to show it to you today, but just going to show you one of those that's available, and they're very tightly integrated with Microsoft, is the Adobe Sign option. And let me show you quickly how some of this works. So from a document approval perspective, I have a template library here where we use some of our master service agreements, some of the templates that are here, and you'll notice that 3 of them are in a status of approved, and these have been approved by me. These are the versions that everybody will see, that has read rights to this library. This one, the draft one, will not be visible to people in general because it has not been approved yet. And in order to approve the document, I would then review the document and then naturally go and find the submit for approval workflow. Now, this workflow will actually then identify who the document owners are and also identify the workflow that's required to get this document into an approval state. And it's as simple as clicking the submit to approval. The document will then enter into a submitted for approval state, and you'll have to wait for the approval for it to be visible. Once again, though, you can see that along with managed access and version history, this is the cornerstone of using document libraries in SharePoint for compliance management. And you look at the version history here. Once again, it gives you the option to see what the latest version is and when the status was approved. And you can see that it was approved by me on the 16th of October, 2023. The other template itself has a similar version history. You can see when it was in draft. It was first in draft on the 28th of February, 2022. And this latest version, was approved on the 16th of October, 2023. So once again, that's a document approval. And this is very important for compliance so that you make sure that people only have access to information that they are authorized to see. When it comes to processes, though, We have a very simplistic one, even in Argantic, that we use from an expense plan perspective. And you can make this significantly more, let's say, sophisticated by using Power Apps, by including little buttons for approval and submission. But our staff are quite easy and quite happy to use the actual simple forms of this. So what we've done is we've created a list and we've attached a workflow approval to it. In this, I'm just going to do a very simple example here. Test expense claim. We have the option of creating this for other people, but you can default it to yourself as well. We've just left it as that. And I'm just going to put a test expense claim in here. I select the approver. Now, I have the ability to select myself as an approver, but in general, when we implement this solution, and anybody else in our organization, obviously from a compliance perspective, from a governance perspective, you can't approve your own expense claims. But for testing and demo purposes, I've allowed myself that option. But anybody else in the organization tried to list themselves as their own approver, it wouldn't even allow them to save it. It would just come up with a violation and say, sorry, you can't do that. What we've implemented for some companies is if your Active Directory is well maintained with your HR organogram, we can automatically look up who your manager is, and then based on certain values, maybe even that person's manager as a secondary approval. All of that is very easy, simple, and possible using the Power Automate backend that is attached to this process. We tend to leave our transactions in a status of draft. So while you're busy, maybe you need to go and find a document somewhere and you don't have it with you immediately. You can save your work and come back and then attach that document later and continue the process. So I'm going to just say, let's say it's for 1,000 Rand, and I'm going to attach an image or a receipt here. And let me just look for a bar receipt. Sorry, there it is. Just took it a little bit slow. So if I go for a bar receipt, it'll come back and show me the image, and I can upload that and store that as part of the transaction itself. Give me 1 second. Working on it. Bar receipt. So, and you can attach multiple attachments to this as well, by the way. So if you have multiple supporting documents, we find, and you'll see just later, I'm going to do an estimates-based system. We've got a PO system we designed for a company pretty recently, where any particular transaction may require up to 4 or 5 different documents being attached. This is where they would go. And then all I do is make this new, and I can save this. Now what will happen is I'll get an email saying that there is an expense claim waiting for me to approve. Under normal circumstances, this would be somebody else that I appoint as an approver rather than myself, but it will follow whatever chain has been programmed into the background. And as you can see, we actively use this. And one of the last steps is to make sure that the expense claims, once approved, end up at finance. Then once they have been paid, marks them as paid, and that's the end of the process. I should have got the process to send the emails can take up to a minute. That's the default time frame for any Power Automate type flows in Microsoft. I'll show you in a second when it pops through. Right, so this is approval workflows and they can be very complicated. You can have a situation where it will go to multiple approvers, but only one of them is required to approve it in order for the approval to come through. Or you will have parallels, which requires both parties or multiple parties to approve the transaction in order for it to go to an approved state. And you can quite literally then route the transaction from one person to another. One very important thing that I just wanted to mention, and this is something I encounter very often, is that many customers have attempted to try and build these things themselves. But what happens is when you go from paper-based solutions to online digital type solutions, customers still get fixated on the idea of having somebody physically sign a piece of paper. So what a lot of companies will do is try and design the system to use a form in a PDF form of sorts that the user is required then to sign using the Adobe Acrobat sign functionality. But anybody who's attempted to build that type of solution in a SharePoint environment will know that it becomes very cumbersome because you've now got to go and find the original place that SharePoint wants you to save this. You know, things don't get uploaded in the right format. There's delays, maybe there's size issues. When it comes to this type of approval, we absolutely recommend you just attach the document, but the approval itself is conducted by the workflow. So instead of signing a piece of paper, you've got a manager that's clicking the word approved, and that approval is recorded in the back. It is 100% legitimate, 100% legal. Just obviously tell your users not to share their passwords with other users. Then the last part I want to show you is when it comes to extending SharePoint to the external world. Sorry, I must have closed it. But there's a product called Adobe Sign. Now, there are multiple options available that Microsoft has now attached to the SharePoint world via Power Automate. Power Automate has the capability. So let me show you some of that. It used to be built directly into SharePoint itself, but it is now available as part of Power Automate. That is where all the sort of process automation and functionality is created. So if I just start an automatic Cloudflow testing quickly, manually trigger, and I'm just going to show you quickly the library of capability that's available from Adobe Sign. It is part of the premium functionality. If I go and click on the add function, if I then just search for Adobe, you will see all the functionality that's available, and Adobe Sign is the Acrobat Sign. So get detailed information, create a library template, create an agreement from a document in, and it'll then send that document off to be signed by your nominated signatures, signees, I think they're called, that you can define within SharePoint itself. So from an approval perspective, there is some very sophisticated and awesome technologies available for your both your internal and external signature capabilities. I'm going to save this because I'm going to show you another flow a bit later on. All right, you'll notice I am skipping through these quite quickly. I'm going to be doing some more awesome demos a little bit later, but this is some very sort of simplistic functionality that can achieve a very sophisticated result. And if anybody wants to go through this in more detail, please reach out to your Dialer Nerd contact, and we'll set something up to show you how this all works. The next level is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most ignored components in SharePoint. And when I deal with many, many companies, there's always a similar problem, and that is many companies out there will use Excel as kind of like a mini database. But that naturally runs into problems because essentially that is still a file. It's owned by one person. You can, yes, share certain elements, and you can connect to external functionality in those Excel files as well, but you almost always run into problems with them. So when you look at building database type solutions for small companies, we do recommend Microsoft Lists. Now, Microsoft Lists in themselves is something that you can attach to in Office 365 as an individual entity, but essentially in the background, it is just a SharePoint list. So the same SharePoint list that you can add to a SharePoint site. So to demonstrate the functionality, I'm going to be showing you something that I'm building for a charity, an NPO that I'm currently working with, QASA, the Quadriplegic Association of South Africa. I need they've kindly allowed me to show you what I'm busy building for them. They've got the ideal circumstance where they've reached out to me and they wanted to start centralizing their member database, and they wanted to make sure that they could have something that was robust and way beyond the functionality of Excel. So what I've done for QASA, and by the way, they're an awesome organization that really look after people that are quadriplegic, paraplegic. They offer a variety of services for those customers, and they really do, not customers, they're members, and they look after them very, very well. So I've gone ahead and I've built a site for them with a membership database, and I'm going to give you a view on this. And as you can see, for those of you dealing with SharePoint lists in the past, you'll notice that it looks a lot prettier nowadays than it used to in the past. And you've got a lot more sort of conditional formatting that you can put in place. That really, the usability of SharePoint lists at the moment is really, really awesome. So they've got this database. They want to see all the active members, and I built all the features in here so that you can go and filter the views based on where you are, on what data you want to see. These are built-in views to show all the members from the Western Cape. There's other views to show members that are in a status of draft, and there are members that are attached to the head office, and any active members. The process for them starts, however, with a form. And what we've gone ahead and done is we've created a form for CASA that will collect information from outside of SharePoint. So for many people that have been using SharePoint for a while will know that when SharePoint Online was first released, there was an anonymous access component to it that allowed you to publish forms externally from within SharePoint, but it created a nightmare security scenario. So Microsoft eventually shut that down. They deprecated that feature, and they turned to third parties to say, if you want to be able to collect data from outside, please use a series of third-party applications that will secure the application in itself, make sure that it's compliant, make sure it's rigorous from a security perspective, and make sure that the data is collected and then passed off to SharePoint. And one of the most awesome products that we use to do this is a product called Cognito Form. And I know Dial and Nerd uses this quite extensively as well. Cognito Form is very inexpensive, but it's very function rich in terms of features that I really do like. Now, you can also use the Microsoft Forms capability, and if your requirement is not very sophisticated, or it's just a few questions, or maybe it's a survey, that's really a great platform to use it. And you'll see Forms is also coming of age on the Microsoft side of it. However, there are still certain features that are missing that are required for this project. And as a result of it, I instantly suggested that we use Cognito Form. Now, in the background, there is a Power Automate flow that is waiting for a trigger to come from the form so that this external data can then be transferred into SharePoint. So I'm going to show this to you quickly. Put in a dummy. Can't use that ID number. It does not exist. I'm really, sorry, 1972. That is my actual date of birth, giving my age away. And I'll choose some fields here to include in the database itself. There are certain mandatory fields. And I've mirrored this with the SharePoint environment as well, so that you have consistency of your data validation rules. I think that should be, and I can just put my cell number in there and my email address. That should be it. It has a very nice feature as well for a signature field. And this is 100% legal, by the way. It meets with all international e-sign requirements. So pretty cool. Now, when I hit the submit button, what it's now going to do is it's now going to upload that information directly into SharePoint, but from outside of SharePoint. So you can see there, it's now included the record. What's really cool about this, though, is it's also at the same time included the actual form that I filled in with my signature. Now, this is a very specific scenario that we've built for CASA in terms of signing up new members and managing members that they already have. But you can apply this process and flow and capability with a wide variety of different business processes. And in this case, what's really cool is that you end up with the actual attachment as part of the record in SharePoint with all the data, and you can track this back to the actual record in Cognito Flow as well. When the Power Automate fires, it gives you the ability to upload as much information as you want to. So this is really cool. And as you can see now, my record is now available. They have a typical process where they now need to assign it to a branch and change the status from draft to new. You can see that process that I've done before. So if I now go to active and I save this, my record will now come up as part of the active member lists, and I'm under head office. There we go. So using SharePoint lists as a database is really, really awesome and something that I really do recommend. However, just a word of warning, SharePoint lists have a limit of 33 million items. That is a built-in limit to how many records you can store in SharePoint. But it's the age-old saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should. If you're going to go beyond, I would say, 10, 20,000 records in a list, please start to consider using Azure as a platform rather than SharePoint. SharePoint functionality is really, really awesome when the list numbers are small. You can go beyond 10 and 20,000, by the way, but it requires very special design interventions to make sure that your views continue to function. So just keep that in mind. One of the other nice things, though, is that version history attaches to list items as well. So when it comes to records in a list item, you get the exact same audit trail that you get in document libraries. And you can see exactly who's done what. In this case, it's the flow activity that I'm logged on with. But if I logged on with an actual user account, it will show exactly who has changed what and when. You can also, as before, revert back to a previous version if you wanted to restore the information. So SharePoint lists are really, really awesome, and using them in conjunction with document libraries, you're now well on your way to building an awesome collaboration and compliance platform. Now let's start to build this out a little bit more complicated. So one of the real nice sort of levels of functionality that you can get with SharePoint is when you really start to bind a variety of platforms together. I'm going to show you a little bit of a demo of how this is done. So in this case, we're talking about Power Apps, Power Automate, SharePoint, Exchange, and Power BI. I want to just show one, yes, and that's for a company called Argantic Couriers. Before I do that, there's one other little demo I want to show you quickly. Sorry, I think I skipped over it. I'm just asking myself the question. When you encounter one of the scenarios we encounter quite often, and that is when it comes to the whole generation of documents for potential customers. And we've got a number of customers that are asking us, and they're coming up with the same thing. And it's something that I experience myself when I go to the bank. So that your customers are saying to you, but every time you want me to do something, you send me a form. But on that form, you're asking me to fill out all the information you already have. Why can't you just send me the form pre-populated with the information that I've already given you, and I just indicate to you if something has changed? So I've got a few customers that have asked me for that, so I wanted to show you typically how we build something like that. Once again, a very simple situation, but to give you an idea of how easy it can be to create something of this nature. So I've got a dummy customer database here, and let's say I'm going to add a new record. George, and let's say Mansfield, and put in a dummy ID number, and then once again a phone number 086-767-8978, not a real number, phone it if you like. George m@company.com. What happens here is I now have a record in a list, and I want to be able to send a form. So I've designed a Power Automate flow, and I'll show you real time as it executes. So what I've done is I want to take this record and I want to send a contact update form. Now, this can be any sort of form. I just wanted to highlight for you how you can go ahead and pre-populate information into a template. So this template is sitting, before I show you, I'll show you quickly. It's sitting in a document library, so you can access this template from anywhere. Once again, can also be controlled in the same way as you do with document approvals, but in this case, you'll see it's just a template that's empty. You can see it's looking for first name, surname, ID number, email. And what I do is I want to fire off a record for George Mansfield. Demo creates from template. So it then starts the Power Automate little bar on the right-hand side. This bar very often can be used to capture what they call initiation parameters. So if there's information that's required to initiate your flow, this is where they will be captured. But for me, all it's doing is saying, well, do you want to run this flow? And I'm going to say it's connecting to Power Automate, and I'm going to say run the flow. And then I'm going to go to my Power Automate, and I'm going to just check there should be a new flow running. There it is. It's just started. And I'll give you a quick run through of what this flow is going to do. The flow takes the record from SharePoint. It gets the detail. It gets the Word template that I showed you. It populates it. It then uploads that document to the SharePoint record I've just created. It then uses the OneDrive create file capability to convert that file to a PDF. It then adds that PDF file to that record as well, and then deletes the file from OneDrive. And if I go back to the record now, and I open up this record, you will see it has now. Somebody needs to be on mute. I just want to edit this record, and you'll see all the data is there. And now I've got my Word form pre-populated from the information from the SharePoint list. You'll see the name I've just made up is now included in the document. That's something that people are asking for. And here's a PDF version. And I can just as easily email this to the customer from within this workflow. That's a simple function. And here you'll see is the PDF version that was created using the OneDrive convert file function. So very quickly, sorry, I wanted to show you that earlier, but I forgot about it, actually, to be honest. But it took quite a bit of time to put this thing together, so I'm really keen to show you. I think in my haste to make sure that I finish within the time, I am moving at quite a pace. So there you go, the PDF version, and that document can be sent off to your customer. I now get to doing a more complicated scenario that starts to use all of the little bits and pieces that we've put together. And this now comes back to the Argantic couriers that we've been dealing with so far. But I'm going to go to the home screen. And I'm going to show you all the bits and pieces that we've now put together. So we go to the home screen, and we put this demo together for a customer of ours, where they have a situation where customers are emailing them requests for estimates or quotes. And right now what happens is those emails go to individual people who then either fire up an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document. They do a bunch of calculations. They collect some supporting documentation. Sometimes they include it, sometimes they don't. But the number of mistakes that are being made has become quite dramatic, and it's impairing the company's ability to use the modern environment that they have to grow and scale at a much more efficient rate. So they have Office 365, but they don't use SharePoint for anything. People have just gotten used to using their desktops and Excel, and it's become a real problem. They wanted a system where they could centrally manage the request for estimates, even though it might still involve the same person that was requested to provide the estimate, but the platform itself will manage the process and be able to give management information about the speed of operation and also an audit trail on an estimate request. So using all of the little bits and pieces that I've shown you up to now, I'm now going to show you a little bit of a process that my colleague, one of the employees, Ruan, has put together. And it starts off typically as an email. So we have an email address that has got a mailbox dedicated to it called Packages at Argantic. And if you send an email to that, it picks up the email and actually drops it in this list. Now, that takes a couple of minutes, so I'm not going to show it now. We don't have time, but that's a very easy thing to demonstrate. But I've got some records waiting here, and there's one I sent earlier with a request for information, or a request for a quote. Now, what's nice about this is that all the information that's in this here, in this item, has come from the email that was sent. So the email body itself is captured in the request, and you can keenly request it. This is quite important. You can also attach any attachments that were in the email to this record as well. We've obviously, from a demo perspective, just kept this very, very simple. So as you see here, we've got a request that has come in, and it's saying estimate for shipping. And they say they wanted to ship the package by air freight, and there are the dimensions. Now, I filled in the information. Obviously, you can also, and there's a lot of companies that are asking us, you can train AI to actually pick that information up out of the email and pre-populate the fields that are there. We're getting to that stage. We're still just a little short of the maturity of AI to be able to do that consistently well. But the next iteration of this demo, we're definitely going to include AI to show you how clever it actually is and its capabilities. But yes, you most definitely can insert AI into the process. But in this case, it's just asking me for some dimensions. We'll do some calculations in the background. You can see it was assigned to me. It was auto-assigned by the fact that the email was sent to me and to the packages type. But what I can do is I can add in any quotes that I get. But now that I've filled the information in, I change the status as ready to process. Now you'll notice when I click save, we've got a validation rule in place. It won't allow me to say it. It says freight type is required when the status is that. So we've built in a rule to say you absolutely have to specify what the freight type is when you're in one of those statuses. And if you remember correctly, they're asking air freight. I can go, okay, I must just change this to air freight. And then make sure it's ready to process, and I can hit save. Now, what this does is in the background, it'll fire off a process to go and take the information that I've given it. It takes a template, and it will send off the email to the person that requested it. The actual customer, we demoed this to ask for a staging step. So, and you can easily do that before it gets sent off to the customer. You have the person it was assigned to gets to see the end product before it gets sent off, so that they can make sure that it's all correct. Some customers still don't trust the technology entirely, and I don't blame them. You want to try and avoid mistakes. So it's ready to process. Once again, it's got a little filter in the background, a little process in the background that fires off every 3 or 4 minutes. And well, actually, it's every minute, I think, at the moment, but it can be in a very busy system up to 3 or 4 minutes. But one of the things I want to show you while this is in process is we've now built in a KPI statistics dashboard, which can link to the data from the estimates themselves, where you can build in these types of reports to show, who are responding properly, what are the averages for the entire team, and you can now start to manage the work rates of individuals and of your teams specifically to make sure that you're meeting the KPI, either individual KPIs or rules that you've set for your organization. In this type of situation, when it comes to the freight and logistics industry, he who responds first is very often the one that's going to get the business. We go back here now. I'm assuming by now it should already have fired off. Yep, it's now been processed by the system. And if I go into the record itself, you will see there is now an attachment at the bottom, as you've seen previously. And this is a much more complicated template that we've put together, just to give you an idea of the level of sophistication that you can go to when automatically generating documentation type. And in this case, we've just made it a Word document, but we could very easily have converted it to a PDF, as I showed you previously for that contact update documentation. And as you can see here, it's taken the information that I've provided, punched it into a calculation mechanism, done all the charge, put everything in the right tables, and attached conditions at the bottom of the page. So quite a sophisticated process, that's been automated using SharePoint and the products that you get along with Office 365 and Microsoft 365. Yes, and I think that's the last step. Right. So that's quite a sophisticated solution that you can put together. And I'm hoping that gives you a nice view of the type of things that you can put together when you use all the bits and pieces that you get along with your Office 365 subscription, and you underpin the whole process with SharePoint. You can put some really good automated processes together to really make your business more efficient. And then the last slide.
Gary,
Yeah?
I see Leanne asks here if different exchange rates and costings can be used in those estimates.
Yes, it can. So one of the steps we're building for that customer is we're going to be doing a lookup of the prevailing exchange rate at the time the estimate is produced. There is also a process in place to do a lookup of freight charges from a system from one of the airlines that has an API available to it. Yeah, so, you know, the kind of thing that a lot of the big couriers kind of do. This is what we're going to be building into this type of system. But when you consider it, when you use Power Automate to build these types of solutions, the sky is the limit. You can make it as complicated or as simple as you like. And if it means looking into or connecting into external systems to pull live real-time data, yes, absolutely, you can do that. One thing I must just mention, though, is that the Power Automate that you get with Office 365 is limited to very simple functionality. When you get to the point where you need to connect to HTTP or you want to connect to a SQL database, you do need a Power Apps premium license, but only the user account that you're using to execute needs that license. And we very often will design Power Apps type systems like this to use a single user account when executing. So it's not a big expense, but you get a whole lot of functionality with it. Does that answer the question, Petri?
I'm sure it did.
Cool. Then the last slide, there's no demo attached to this, but just something that I wanted to mention. One of the foundational components of today's talk was, using SharePoint as the principal element in your collaboration and compliance journey. And in the past, there used to be a SharePoint-based mechanism called the Compliance Center in Office 365, where you used to go and set your retention policies, your tagging that attaches to documentation, your sensitivity labels. All of these were driven through the compliance management. That is now all done by a product called Purview. Purview is the product that Microsoft attaches to the top of your data estate. And what that does enable is allows you to do compliance management from a global level. So it means essentially it doesn't matter where your documents reside, they will have the compliance rules attached to them, regardless of where they exist or where they are transmitted to. The tools that Microsoft are providing you, along with Intune, will allow you to have a very robust and comprehensive data loss protection and information management strategy. When it comes to Purview, we've got a request from a customer during the week. They work in the motoring industry, and they gave us a rather bizarre standard that they were required to meet. And when we went and looked at the templates that were available in Purview, there it was already available, and it will give you a sort of a gap analysis between what's already in play in your data estate versus what is required from the compliance regulation. Really, really good starting point. None of that, however, is usable unless you've completed your journey to SharePoint from a data perspective and start to make use of the tools that are available to you in the cloud. When it comes to the discussion on Purview and other tools that are quite important for compliance, please reach out to your Dial a Nerd contact. That is a session entirely on its own. And it's quite important that you look at what we call the the 4 pillars of information management, data loss protection, and compliance, and that is Purview, Intune, Defender, and Entra ID. And with that, I think we may have a couple of minutes for Q&A.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, so I want to open the floor. If anybody has any specific questions for Gary, I realize we don't have too much time left, but obviously we're very happy to have these conversations afterwards as well. Are there any questions from the floor? Doesn't seem like it. Well, if that's the case, guys,
there's some questions in the chat, Piotr. If you want me to.
Yeah, I think I've been looking at these questions, and I think you answered most of them. Lee, I don't know if have all of your questions been answered. I think you covered most of them.
There's a question about Cognito Form. So it says, with approvals, doesn't one have to create the workflow first before submitting for approval? There's 2 types. You get a casual one where you can just generally ask for the approval. But if you want to follow a defined path in terms of, let's say there's an expense claim and only somebody with a certain mandate can actually access or actually approve a certain value, that approval workflow has to be implemented first and then attached or executed from the document. The second one is, where is the data stored once the Cognito form is completed? Cognito has its own data repository for data that's been stored. So if you need to get that, but then the data is passed off to SharePoint and you get a secondary copy of it there.
Perfect. Thank you.
100%.
Gary, thank you very much for your time. I'm pretty sure this was an eye-opener for a lot of the attendees here who's used to the basic functionality of SharePoint. And can see what SharePoint actually is capable of, just making everybody's lives a lot easier, a lot more efficient and productive as well in terms of processes. That's where we find in our business, we freed up so much time from employees that it really made a big difference in our business. So Gary, thank you very much again for your time. Thanks to everybody that joined as well. It's great to see that we've got so much interest in these sessions, and we'll continue to do so. We're working hard on our next presentation as well. If there are any specific questions, if you've got a bit of stage fright and you don't want to talk in front of everybody, please reach out to us. We're very happy to have this conversation. Very happy to put you guys in touch with Gary as well for a more in-depth discussion. And yeah, just to see how we can help you guys going forward and get the most out of your SharePoint environment. And as Gary said, a lot of what has been discussed today is already existing licensing within your Microsoft 365 tenant. So in a lot of cases, to get some of these things done, there are no additional kind of monthly costs and licensing costs required. It just requires some configurations and setups in the back end. So reach out to us, let us know where we can help, and we'll definitely put you guys in touch with Gary. Thanks, guys. Just one quick last check if there's any questions. Nope, doesn't seem like it. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for joining. Keep an eye on your inbox within the next hour or so for your Uber Eats voucher. Enjoy lunch on us, and yeah, we'll see you guys next month again. Thank you very much. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye-bye.